Good afternoon, everybody. Jason here with Murideo, and on today's webinar, we're going to be visiting Calman 2020 and just taking a look at it and seeing some of the new features and some of the new workflows. I have a special guest with me today, Tyler Pruitt from Portrait Displays. How you doing, Tyler?
Hello.
So thank you guys so much for attending the webinar today. I see tons of familiar names in the attendee box, so thank you guys so much for being here. If you guys have questions during the webinar, as Tyler and I are talking about Calman 2020, feel free to type those questions into the chat box. I'll do my best to check those throughout the presentation and answer those questions as we go along. And then, of course, at the end, we'll leave about 10 or 15 minutes in case you guys have questions at the end. This should last about 45 minutes. I know Tyler and I, we've said that in other webinars, we've gone a little bit over. So if you can't stay for the entire time and you have to jump off early for some reason, no worries at all. We're going to record this and put it up on YouTube in the next day or two. So with that being said, Tyler, Calman 2020, what's new, what's cool, what's going on?
Yeah, so we're getting ready to release Calman 2020 R2, which is our second major release of the year. And there's some great new features. We added support for 2020 Samsung QLED TVs, the 4K and 8K models. We have a cool new feature with LG called Shadow Detail. We added support for, and we're going to go into all of these more in depth, but I just thought I'd give everybody an overview.
Sure, no problem.
We added support for a new Mac OS pattern generator called Patterns by Avical.
Cool.
If anybody knows who Dave Abrams is, this is his pattern generator app for Mac OS that works with
That's great. Good for him. That's awesome.
And then we've also added support for the just announced Dell UP3221Q HDR monitor.
Very good.
And then we have a new workflow called computer monitor check workflow, and I can talk about kind of the use case of that.
Yeah, and from our standpoint at Murideo, a couple cool updates too. The 7G generator works with Calman 2020. That worked with R1. And the 6G Gen 2 generator with the HDR test patterns and the CEC ping test and those types of things, that works also with Calman 2020 now as well. So from our perspective, we are firing on all cylinders. Everything's working and everything's been great so far. With R1, I'm really excited to see what happens with R2.
Yeah, we're excited about it. I think everybody understands how much of a challenge it is to work these days. Both of our teams in Washington State and Seattle and in the Bay Area, San Francisco, are all working from home. So it's been kind of a challenge to juggle all these hardware devices. Like, hey, we have to have an 8K TV go to somebody's house, or they have to come in to the office by themselves. So it has been a challenge, but we're working through it.
That's excellent, excellent. Ladislav has asked if there's a release date yet. Did you guys come up with a release date yet? You're still working on that?
Imminent.
Yeah, and the beta is out though. Yes, am I right there?
Yeah. So we released a few weeks ago a public beta to our beta testing list, and I think this is a good time to bring up that if you're a Calman user and you're not a part of our beta program, you can go to our website, portrait.com, and if you go to the footer of the web page, there's a beta tester sign up, and we have hundreds of users that are already a part of the beta program. And one important thing to note is you don't have to sign up each time. So once you're on the beta list, then you will just automatically get the notification that there's a new beta to download when we release one.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I think I pestered you with that last time. I think I was like, do I need to sign up again? You're like, no, just once, you're good. So that's good info. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So cool.
One thing I wanted to talk about the beta is for people that are part of it or are going to join is we read every single piece of feedback and we have daily meetings to go over the feedback. So it is very important to get that feedback from people because I've beta tested software and I've kind of fallen into the same trap as like, oh, somebody else will report this bug. But when you have a product like Calman where it's not like Photoshop where there's millions of users,
sure,
each person's feedback is critically important because it could be that you're the only person that ran into this problem.
Very true.
Or you're the person that found it first. And if you assume somebody, it's kind of like the whole the bystander syndrome. Somebody also called the police
after
that accident. So It's
Yeah, no,
important that
that's a good
even if
point.
you think that it's an obvious bug that everybody's going to see, it's good to have it from multiple people.
Yeah.
So
So
please submit that feedback if you are part of the program. Also, if you just have feedback in general, we have a feedback forum on the website. And at any time, if you have feature requests or need clarification or you have suggestions, we read those, all of them. So they're
okay,
very
cool.
critical to Calman's development.
And just one more time in case anybody didn't hear you before, to sign up for the beta, portrait.com, scroll down to the bottom and there's a link down there.
Yep. It just says
Perfect.
Calman beta program.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, cool guys. Well, with that being said, gosh, let's dive into it. What do you want to talk about first?
Okay, I'll just share my screen because I'll talk a lot, but I might also want to show some stuff
Sure.
depending on what. So for example, like Calman, the new Samsung TVs. So we go to find display, go down to Samsung. Now we will have the 2020
Awesome.
IP control for the 4K and the 8K models. The TVs, most of them still have the serial connection, the
Mm-hmm.
X-Link cable.
Right.
So if it is being deprecated at some point, but currently I think it will continue to work as well. That's why we have it right here. We have the IP connection and then we have the regular connection as well.
Good.
So if you can't do an IP connection for some reason, you always have the option. If that particular model has the X-Link port, which is just an RS-232 serial port, you
Right.
will be able to still do that. And one other thing is the Cal Day and Cal Night modes, we are not able to enable those over IP. So
Okay.
that is one difference that,
Good note.
if you don't use those, it's not a big deal, but if you do use those, then you might want to continue using serial on these.
Did I see too, Tyler, recently for people who've been working on Samsungs for a couple of years? I think I may have seen recently, totally correct me if I'm wrong here, but in the old days, I'll call them the old days, you used to have this very, very, very specific serial to USB adapter. I think there was like 2 in the world that you recommended. Is that kind of old news now? Can you kind of use any of them now, or is that still a thing?
Well, essentially, you need a USB to serial adapter, and most people understand this, that there's 2 chipsets. There's FTDI, which is like the good one, and
Right.
then there's one called Prolific that's usually cheaper. And on some devices it works great, on some you can never get it to work. So we
Sure.
always recommend using an FTDI chipset. And then
Okay.
the cable is just a RS-232 to 1/8 inch headphone jack.
Yep.
But since serial cables can either be null modem or not, we found that this particular one on DigiKey or Amazon, we've tested and we know that it's the right polarity.
Cool.
If you get one that isn't, then you can always use a null modem adapter to reverse the
just
polarity. It's really
flip it,
just
yeah.
reversing 2 pins.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that. But I
Sure.
think on our web, you can actually, I think we're still selling them on our website, but also we in the user guide for the Samsung TVs, we link to where you can purchase your own
Excellent.
from somebody else.
Excellent. John asked if, and maybe you know this or not, but John asked if the Cal Day and Cal Night modes will ever be able to be enabled over IP, or is this just a temporary thing?
We're not sure. We've been discussing that with Samsung, but we don't have any definitive answer. I think
Okay.
feedback from calibrators to them as well, I think is good.
Yeah.
That this is, because previously it was hidden in the service menu, and that's always, especially on
Yeah.
Samsung, it's kind of dangerous to
Scary.
go into if you don't know what you're doing, because there's stuff in there that you cannot recover.
Yes.
There's no like, oh, undo. So for people that don't know what they're doing there, they can get in trouble pretty quickly. So we are definitely advocating that
Yeah.
they enable that, or maybe there's going to be some other solution that replicates that.
I'm having awful nightmares and flashbacks of HDMI calibration failure in the service menu of a Samsung. That was a problem for what, a decade?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real quick, guys, too, I just want to mention before we get too deep, you can, if you want to, you can size Tyler's Calman screen to be bigger or smaller as we're doing the webinar here live. Obviously, if it's recorded and you're watching on YouTube, it's kind of, it is what it is. But if you wanted to, on your end of things, if you wanted to make Tyler's screen bigger so you can see the Calman screen bigger, there is a slider bar that you can slide up and down to make that screen bigger and make our cameras smaller. Feel free to do that at your leisure. I just wanted to point that out before we got too deep. Kevin asked, is there a specific menu field to connect by IP? I think that's what you're showing us right now with the drop down. There's two options, right?
Yeah,
IP and
yeah.
serial.
So 2020 IP is here, and then it will ask you for the IP address. Now, one important thing to note is in Samsung's menu, you have to enable IP control. It's the
Okay.
same thing that you have to enable if you want to do home automation or control
Right.
for stuff like that. So it's the same essentially type of connection that we are making, but you
Okay.
have to go in. It's not enabled by default for security reasons. So
Sure.
you do have to go turn on enable IP control.
Cool.
And then for the serial connection, it's just like it always was. You have the select your COM port, which is your USB to serial adapter.
Excellent. Kevin, I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free, type away, and we'll go a little deeper if you need to. All right. Excellent. Excellent. So that's cool. The Samsung 2020s are now covered. That's awesome. I ran into a Q90. That's the newest one, right? A couple weeks ago.
Q90T.
Yeah, yeah. And I just calibrated it manually. It was fine, but now that it's on the list, it'll be fun to play with going forward. Cool. Okay, Kevin says thanks. So that was his question. That's awesome. And Sylvan says hi. Hi, Tyler.
Hello.
All
So
righty.
the next thing I wanted to talk about was Dave Abrams' new patterns application. It's a Mac OS pattern generator application.
Cool.
And some people are like, what is the use case for this? So, for example, Apple's new XDR HDR display, they have added basic calibration functionality in the way that kind of a DLP projector, like cinema projector works, where you tell the Mac OS, I've measured the display, here's what it's measuring, because it will think that it's calibrated, but here's what it actually measured, and then it will do an offset of all its tables.
Nice.
But there has been really no way to use Calman to measure the HDR performance of that and do that shift in HDR easily. There was ways to use like HDR MP4 files, but doing that is like really painful.
Sure,
so
sure.
his application allows you to really not only with the XDR, but any Mac-based connected display. So maybe you want to just calibrate some other display that's connected to the Mac. Well, this allows you to use the Mac as the pattern generator for that. Also,
cool.
it supports HDR and all the color gamuts, and it's really tied in with Mac OS's color management system. So
awesome.
It's definitely a cool thing. It hasn't actually launched yet. It's like imminent, but we're adding it to Calman right now. So when it drops on the Mac App Store, it will be your version of Calman will already be ready for it.
So you'll have to download the app onto the Mac, and then I'm sure just pick the appropriate workflow.
Yeah. So you would just go to find source, and then instead of our Murideo 7G that we have connected, you'll just select Avocal patterns, and you'll enter IP address, and you'll connect to it.
Nice.
And it'll behave like any other pattern generator. Now the other thing is you have to like turn HDR on in the app itself on the Mac first, and you pick which color space you're trying to work with.
Got it.
And stuff like that. But I think that will be a big thing for people that not only are trying to measure and calibrate, but also people that do reviews of displays and Apple products. They will be able to get very precise color measurements of the screen without having to do workarounds with like video files or other things like that.
Are you seeing some good numbers off that display so far? It looks promising.
Yeah, it seems they're very consistent. It's just when it first shipped, there was no, like, obviously they calibrated the factory, but 6 months later, there was no mechanism. Now they have a mechanism where you can enter the actual measured values, and then they will create an offset for that to calibrate the monitor.
Is it just like white point and then primaries, or is it a little more than that? You
I don't
remember?
have one plugged in. I think it's just the white point for now.
Oh, okay, cool. Cool, cool. Yeah, I remember working on, old Samsung DLPs and some DLP based projectors that were kind of like that. Yeah, you have the actual measured value, what it's really doing. You plot that in, hit a button, boom, auto calculates and it's done. That's cool.
And that's how every single digital cinema projector works.
Yeah,
So in movie theaters or in a DI suite in Hollywood for grading a movie, that's how the calibration performed, by measuring what the primaries and white point are, and then feeding the actual data back in, and then it
Mm.
calculates everything, what it needs to do to achieve that.
And time wise, what are you talking? It doesn't sound like it'll take much time at all.
No,
Yeah,
there's not a lot,
minutes.
very few measurements.
Yeah, yeah, very
So
cool.
I
Good.
guess that is especially with those DLP projectors, is they're super linear. So
Yeah,
they don't have like non-linear display problems like a lot of consumer or even just flat panel based displays have,
good.
because the DLP chip is an inherently linear device.
Sure, sure. Awesome. Good. That sounds cool.
Okay,
Congratulations
the
to
next
Minnie.
thing,
That's good.
yeah, the next thing is, uh, and I think there'll be more information at avocal.com coming soon on that.
Good.
Next thing is we have a new workflow under analysis. It's called computer monitor check.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of our people that review computer monitors or review laptops, and also our manufacturing partners that want to use Calman to validate their factory calibrations and stuff like that, wanted a dedicated computer monitor measurement and validation workflow. So it's pretty simple. It has buttons to open your pattern window or connect the meter. A lot of times, maybe they'll have Calman installed on the laptop itself,
Mm-hmm.
or device that's going to be measuring, and they just want to open the pattern window. Allows you to set all your calibration targets. It
Mm-hmm.
also works directly with the the SDR analysis report. So you can generate a report from this after you've measured the grayscale here, the color gamut, and the color checker. So it's just a simplified way for somebody that just wants to quickly take validation
Mm-hmm.
measurements and accuracy measurements for a PC-based display. Because most of Calman's workflows are set up for video levels, because they're made to calibrate video displays, not computers, except for our computer monitor workflow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of tedious for people to have to go into our other workflows and change the range and stuff like that. And we just wanted to make something streamlined that was easy to use for these specific use cases.
Good. Simpler the better. That's awesome. Love it.
Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is we have now added support for Dell's new UP3221Q. This is their
Mm-hmm.
new HDR, 32-inch HDR monitor. It has 2,000 local dimming zones. It has something. It's a first for us. It's actually Calman powered, and what that means is we've taken our technology and embedded it in the monitor itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the monitor does have its own colorimeter built into it. You can plug, for example, a C6, a K10, a CR100, a photo research, all in directly to the monitor's USB port, and it will run a calibration process internally without any software external to the monitor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's also Calman ready. So if you have a measurement device that isn't supported directly, or you just want to use Calman to provide, say you're offering calibration to somebody as a service, and you want to calibrate this monitor and provide a report with it and everything, then you can still connect with Calman and do your normal Calman ready style calibration that you
Mm-hmm.
would do with another display device like BenQ or Asus. But it does have the ability to calibrate itself. One of the other interesting features is you can store meter profiles in the monitor. So
Oh,
for example,
nice.
it does have the kind of windshield wiper measurement device that comes out of the display
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
bottom to perform its own calibration. Now, say you have 50 of these monitors in your visual effects studio or something.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's going to be slight variation to the accuracy of each one of those meters, right?
Sure.
But if you have something like a CR250 or a photo research or some other device that's supported, you can take each monitor and perform a meter profile with your Halo Spectro, and then do that on every single monitor. And then you can have it do its own internal calibration, but it will be using that profile. So all of the monitors would point back to your one reference spectra. That's kind of
Cool.
an interesting feature that we haven't seen yet on a monitor that has built-in calibration.
I'm
So
a
we have upgraded our display-specific workflow, the Dell one, to support, because last fall we added support for Dell's non-HDR 27-inch UP2720Q as Calman ready. It did have its own built-in calibration, but it wasn't powered by Calman, whereas the new one is. But we could, in the previous generation, last fall, Calman 2019, calibrate that other Dell monitor. Now we can
right.
do both of them, including for HDR. So we're really excited about that. It's like the first time we've done Calman powered, but also we do support Calman ready for people that want to do more advanced things like custom gamma curves and custom white points and kind of those more advanced things that a lot of pro
Sure.
calibrators offer as a service that is beyond just what a typical technician does, where they throw a meter on a screen and push a button.
Yeah.
So we're excited to have it not only be Calman powered, but Calman ready, because it still gives calibrators that extra flexibility to do certain things that the built-in software in the monitor can't do, just because you're talking about the whole version of Calman instead of a subset of Calman
Right.
functionality.
I'm looking at your website right now, and there's already a Dell walkthrough. Is that for the older models? The one that's on
Yes.
the website now?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep. We're working on those for the new one.
Yep. And while we're on the subject, I have to say, these walkthroughs that you guys have done are very good. So thank you for providing those. I've sent those to, I can't tell you how many calibrators ring me up and they say, hey, I'm going to do a blah, blah, blah TV. I know it has AutoCal, but I've never done it before. What should I look out for? And I'm like, man, here's a PDF right here of the guide that walks you right through it. So thank you guys for providing those. They're very helpful.
Yep, and also we're committing to do even more tutorial videos.
Yeah,
For example, we're doing the Dell one, and we have the Calman Home ones for the different manufacturers,
sure.
but we're also working on professional LG ones that are really covering it from a professional calibrator's perspective instead of a home user's perspective.
Awesome. That's good.
So we're, for the rest of the year and going forward in 2021, we're going to be doubling down on more tutorial videos because we've gotten excellent feedback on that.
Good.
And it's
Good to
not just
hear.
because I'm the one that does the videos.
Tyler, you're just so handsome. Everybody just wants to see you and hear your voice.
Well, good thing they don't have to see me, they just have to hear me. So
Yeah. Well, good. That's awesome. All good news, man. That's good stuff. And then
yep.
you also,
And
I'm sorry,
sorry, go ahead.
there's also the Dell, and then feel free to bonk me on the head if I'm wrong here, but didn't you also mention an Asus monitor as well?
Yeah, we support the Asus ProArt PA32 UCX, which is a monitor that's in the same class as the Dell. And then also there's a baby brother of that monitor, which is the kind of the 27-inch version of it. And
Yeah.
then we also support 3 different models from BenQ as well for kind of the same 3D LUT based calibration of essentially higher end computer monitors that are intended for graphic artists.
That was what I was going to ask you for my own curiosity, really. I don't personally get to work on a ton of computer monitors, so I'm always intrigued to hear about these high-end computer monitors. Are you seeing these more in studio environments, or are they more like photography and graphic design type environments, or is it a mix?
Well, So it depends on what the use case is. Some people, especially the ones that only do SDR, it's more of a, you see them a lot as a color accurate GUI monitor, or some people use them as a reference monitor for less critical tasks. So for example, video editors and stuff where they need to see accurate color, but they're not doing a final color grade on the movie or piece of content. So they don't need like a Sony BVM or a Flanders or something like that. And also with regards to HDR is there's a huge issue where so many different people are working with HDR, including pretty much all of the AAA games are now being done in HDR. And it hasn't been really feasible to have a $30,000 monitor on each artist's desk.
Sure.
So then, but the other side of the coin was they could use OLED TVs or high-end LCD, LED TVs. But then the problem is usually only the premium ones are usually larger. Like they're not much smaller than 50 inches, like maybe 48 on the LG. So you can get smaller TVs that are 4K HDR, but they're usually the budget models that you wouldn't want to use for evaluating HDR performance on your $300 million game, right? So that's where these kind of, I would say, HDR computer monitors, I mean, you can use them for video, and a lot of people do, but that is where they kind of slot in, where they don't cost $30,000, but they have almost the same performance as something that does. It's just a little bit down from that, but it's totally appropriate for an artist, and especially if you have a room full of them working on either game or VFX or something where they're not doing final color grading like somebody you would need an actual HDR reference monitor. Or they might have one per like floor. I've seen at some VFX studios where they have these alternative HDR monitors for all the artists, but then maybe in one room in the floor, they have the real HDR reference monitor, the $30,000 one that is going to be used as the final QC approval. So that's a common setup. So these have also, one thing that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about is now that HDR is becoming more democratized, you know, even the new iPhone can shoot in Dolby Vision / HLG.
Yeah, so we've talked about that.
the big bottleneck has always been in HDR content production is the cost of a HDR reference monitor. So I see these monitors also as enabling a lot of, you know, more independent filmmakers or even independent creators and YouTubers and stuff to actually put out stuff in HDR, because YouTube has supported HDR for several years. So I don't see why a lot more people that are independent creators that are putting out their own content shouldn't be able to start moving to an HDR pipeline.
Good. Very good.
Okay, so the other thing we wanted to talk about is LG's shadow detail control. So we work very close with LG on this. Is due to panel variability, some panels have slightly crushed blacks, some don't, and we've never had an easy way to really adjust the absolute very bottom of the 1D LUT. It's really, unless you have either a Klein or a CR100 or something in that class of measurement device, you really haven't had the accuracy and precision down there to actually measure that area.
Right.
So typically you would just look down there with actual test patterns, like a brightness pattern, or so this allows you to modify essentially lift the shadows or bring them down depending on your specific panel. And it's all below the bottom point that you actually measured during the 1D LUT auto cal.
Okay.
So, and it blends into the last point you measured. So it allows you, let me actually connect to the TV to kind of make this
let's
show
see
what this control does. Because I have to have lights on in the room so you guys can see me, I don't want to actually take measurements because I have a CR100 here and it's not I don't think it's blocking out all the light. So I don't want to get some erroneous behavior. So I'm not actually going to take the measurements, but I will show how the controls work.
And you're hooked up to a CX, is that correct?
Yes.
Cool. And
So
this new feature is only the X's, is that right? For now, at least?
So that
Maybe.
is what we're intending. We are working with LG to look at the previous generation. We've done some testing with the C8 and found it was beneficial. We're still looking at the C9. So in a future version of Calman, it might be enabled for the previous generation ones, but it seemed that the CX models and the GX models, it is needed more often. I think,
Okay.
I don't know, panel differences. It has a new chipset. There's a bunch of factors that could be causing it, but we've seen like a little bit of crushed black on average. So it's most needed we've seen on the 2020 model. So that's where we've been focusing on first.
Got it. Cool.
And it's mainly we've had a bunch of feedback from our users in Hollywood about this because they're mastering in a dark room. A lot of the times they'll have an OLED reference monitor next to it, and if the shadows are crushed, it's immediately obvious if they're working on a dark scene when they have something that isn't doing that next to it. So let me select LG. Okay.
And then for those of you who might be watching right now who've never connected directly to a TV, on the LG, for example, that Tyler's working on right now, you simply pick the LG as the manufacturer, you pick the model you're working on. You have to find the TV's IP address, which is hidden, not hidden, but it is in the menu, it's in the network menu. Once you type in the IP address of the LG, they'll talk to each other, they'll make communication. You'll see a little PIN number pop up on the television, pop in the PIN number as Tyler's doing right now, and then boom, 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 Calman is now able to talk directly to the TV, which is a very cool feature. And are you on Wi-Fi right now, or did you connect directly? Just curious.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So in most cases, Wi-Fi is great. We've had some issues where I personally haven't had any real issues with Wi-Fi. Most of our development was always done on Wi-Fi. Now, at like trade shows and stuff, we usually always do Ethernet.
Yes.
But sometimes you go into a consumer's home and they just have some whack network set up, and it's just dropping the connection. And one thing you can do, and a lot of people don't know this, is if you just plug an Ethernet cable directly from your laptop, even if you have like a USB to Ethernet adapter, if you have a newer laptop that doesn't have Ethernet, you can plug it directly into the TV. And the TV, after a little, a minute or two, and your laptop, because they're expecting to see a DHCP server give them their IP address, because there is none, because they're connected to each other directly, after a certain amount of time, which is, like I said, a minute or something, they will assign themselves a 169.254.x.x, something IP address. And that is the range that when a device doesn't get a DHCP, it's supposed to assign itself. And they will be on the same subnet. And then all you got to do is go in and get the IP address and enter it. And you don't even need a switch. You don't need a router. All you need is an Ethernet cable.
Good.
So we've done that at trade shows a lot. It works great. So if you're ever having a networking problem on your own TV or at a consumer's house, I think it's good to have one or two Ethernet cables, and if you need a USB to Ethernet adapter for your PC, to have that as well, as just because there's nothing worse. And when I was doing calibrations for people before I worked with SpectraCal and Portrait, there's nothing worse than having to leave and come back to somebody's house.
Oh, it's the worst. Yeah, for calibration.
Yeah, I would always bring like backup meters, 2 pattern generators. It's like, I know a lot of people do that as well. So, okay, so I'm just gonna open the LG workflow for the heck of it.
Sylvan says while you're
Close.
opening that up, he says he has an Asus PA27 UCX that he's testing at home. He says it's been a great monitor so far for Rec 709. And a couple, he said he's had a couple of problems in HDR with 10% patterns and local dimming, but overall it sounds like he's liking it.
Local dimming is a crazy thing. There's no perfect way to do it because we're talking about we have 8 million pixels and we have 1,000 zones.
Right. Yeah.
And
yeah.
There's a huge trade-off between suppressing blooming versus making things as bright as they should be.
Yes.
And tuning that thing is very complicated. And so a lot of people end up doing firmware updates and stuff as they're getting feedback and tests from users. So
yeah.
If you're seeing stuff like that, definitely also reach out to the manufacturer and give them feedback because I know they, especially on those higher end products, they really listen to feedback.
John mentioned too, just FYI, I know John calibrates a ton of TVs, and John's a big proponent of just connecting directly on Ethernet. He says you never want to lose a connection in the middle of a 3D LUT. I totally agree. So hardwiring, if you have to do it, no big deal.
Yep. Okay, so if we go to our DDC menu here, and we cycle from these are all the values in the grayscale, and there's no gamut because it's a 3D LUT. Now there's this new control down here called shadow detail point and value. And I'll try to explain this because people have been asking me and online, and I thought this would be good to kind of do a deep dive here.
Yeah, sure.
So then people could share the video or a timestamp from it, so I don't have to send individual private messages or emails to people.
Copy paste.
Yeah. So the idea is we're lifting up the 1D LUT at the bottom below, anchored to the lowest point that we actually measured. So we're kind of just going.
Yeah.
You can change. So by default, the lowest point we measure is 23, and this actually represents a 10-bit code value in full range because the LUT is in full range. The video comes in at some point in the video pipeline, it gets expanded to full range to drive the panel in full range, and so the LUT is actually full range. So this is code value. It starts at the 23rd entry in the 1D LUT. That's the lowest point we actually measure, and this allows us to lift based on that. Now, you could change where you want that to blend. I haven't played around with the shadow detail point that much because we're just getting good results anchored to that one point, but we do give you a choice to where you want it to blend in. Now, for example, since the way we calibrate in HDR and SDR is the same, the panel in gamma mode so for HDR, we disable all the HDR processing. We actually measure lower when we're doing the auto cal in HDR mode because after you account for the conversion from PQ to gamma, so for example, 1.4% is the lowest we actually measure in HDR, but if you convert that to PQ, that equals 5% in PQ.
Okay.
So
it's down there.
We're actually going down lower in HDR, but the actual luminance, because the panels in HDR mode, is higher. So for example, this shadow detail point for HDR, it will be 14. In SDR, it will be 23, and those equal the lowest point that we actually adjust. Now, the thing that you will probably actually change and might need to change is the shadow detail value, and this is how much lift there is.
Right.
So what I found is on my specific panel here, 320 was good for SDR, but I had to lower it down to like 100 for HDR. And we're working on a set of test patterns to provide to people. They're not ready yet because, for example, you can use the Spears and Munsell dynamic range low pattern for the HDR validation testing because you want to look at all the code values, every single 10-bit code value from black and right above.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of brightness patterns are only 8-bit. So
Right.
8-bit 17 in 10-bit equals 68, but
Mm-hmm.
black is 64 in 10-bit. So you could see 17, but be crushing 3 code values in 10-bit that you wouldn't
Totally.
be able to see.
Yeah.
So it's important to look at a 10-bit pattern with this, and that's why we're working to create those. But for example, Stacy Spears is on the Spears and Munchel UHD disk. He has a dynamic range low pattern for HDR, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I've been using for HDR, because it allows you to see all those code values. And you really have to be
Right.
in a black room.
Oh, sure.
The other option is if you have a K10 or a CR100, you can measure pretty low below the AutoCal point.
Mm-hmm.
So we're probably going to, we've added this feature, and we're looking for feedback on how it works, like if it's working for people, what their values they ended up with,
Mm-hmm.
because we might want to change the default.
Sure.
And also, we're probably in Calman 2021 R1. It's probably going to be a workflow step with instructions and stuff, and a link to download the test patterns,
Got it.
and maybe even an extra workflow page for people that do have a high-end meter,
Mm-hmm.
that they can actually measure down to those points. But if you have something like an i1 Display Pro or a C6, it really can't measure down in these low areas. So you really
Mm-hmm.
have to use a visual test pattern
Sure.
for that. And then so after you change this, you hit commit, right? And then it takes the 1D LUT that we have in memory. Actually, let me go back for a second. This is an important thing to note. This only works after you've made a 1D LUT. So
After.
after you've done the grayscale, we recommend doing the grayscale and then doing the 3D LUT, then doing this adjustment.
Okay.
Just from our testing, that's been the best results to do. Also, this value is very low, so it doesn't affect the 3D LUT very much at all, because
Mm-hmm.
the first point in the 3D LUT is at 3%, and all of this is
Right.
below that.
Got it.
So it's not going to screw up your 3D LUT, but we've found it's just do the 1D LUT and then the 3D LUT, then mess around with this shadow
Mm-hmm.
detail control. So in your Calman session, you have to do the 1D LUT, and then you can do the 3D LUT, or you don't have to before you do this, but it's recommended. But then you can adjust the shadow detail control, because we're holding the 1D LUT in memory in Calman.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in our RGB, you'll see it RGB controls. And essentially we go into the memory and modify the very bottom end of it. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you hit commit, we change that. And then if you look at the test pattern and it was too bright or it's still crushing, then you can come back and change the lift value up or down depending on your panel, and then hit it again. And you might have to do this in an iterative fashion a couple times.
Sure.
So I thought that was important, so people didn't just open the workflow and hit this and wonder why it didn't change anything, because it's modifying the 1D LUT that we're holding in memory, and then we're just sending it to the TV when you hit commit.
How granular, Tyler, is that value control? So if you go from like 320 to 321, is that just like a teeny tiny little bump?
Oh, this is another important thing that I forgot to mention. So LG's 1D LUT, they are 1,024 entries, so 0 to 1,023. That's how many actual entries in the 1D LUT is from black to white. And then, but their precision is 15 bits. So you can go up and down from 0 to 35,000. So each one of these 321 is 1 out of 35,000 values. So it's a very precise control.
Oh man,
So
that's
usually
awesome.
I kind of go by like when I was playing around and I found out that I needed a value of 100 in HDR, I just kind of dropped it down by 50 and measured
Yeah,
again, dropped it
just
down by
yeah,
50. And
right.
then I think once you go too far, then you can kind of hone it back in. But
Yeah.
if you just do one code value, 321, I doubt you'd barely even be able to measure a difference because
Right.
it's such a precise control. But you do have a pretty big range. You can go from 0 all the way to 1,000.
Oh, good, good.
So you do have a big range. And then your shadow detail point, I think you can go, I'm trying to remember, you can go up to 40. That's where it blends in. But
right.
like I said, you probably don't want to mess with that. But maybe if you have some time on your hands, you can play. Maybe you
Sure.
find that, hey, if it blends at 20, it's slightly better.
Yeah.
But we found that just leaving the default shadow point is probably the correct thing to do. And like I said, this will be different in HDR versus SDR.
Yeah.
The default for HDR is 14 versus 23.
So John actually just asked, he said for SDR, it's 23 and 320. For HDR, it's 14 and 100. Is that's good? Good starting point at least.
So it still defaults to 320 in HDR. On my particular panel, I found I needed 100. So
got it.
Don't freak out if your panel is like that, or maybe it even on one of the engineers at LG, he found that he needed 450 on his in HDR.
Yeah.
So like I said, there is some because this is the very bottom of the LUT, like I said, and this is the first time because previous LG was like, we could do this in our TV's software, but we had some discussions and we're like, well, this would be better to give the calibrators this control because there's so much, not an absurd amount of panel variability, but certain panels behave different.
Enough. Yeah.
If they made every panel perfect, it would be like $25,000.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. No kidding. Yeah.
And you probably wouldn't need to they'd probably perfectly calibrate them and everybody be out of business. So this is, this gives the power to the calibrator to do this precise shadow detail control. And this was probably one of the things that Hollywood is most concerned with is they have been wanting very precise control near black because that's where they kind of see problems a lot and see different panels diverge from each other. And that's where a reference monitor is usually perfect and more consumer grade stuff isn't. But this kind of allows you to have very precise control down there.
Does any of this apply to Dolby Vision at all?
Yes.
Okay.
So I ended up using the same value for HDR10 and Dolby Vision.
All right.
I think John Reformato has probably done more different panels because I only have one panel. But so maybe people could follow up with him on ABS form or something about it because it'd be interesting to see what kind of variability people are seeing.
Totally.
It's like I said, we only have a handful of panels.
Isn't it funny? I'm thinking back to when I started calibrating in 2007 or 8, and I'm thinking back to like our very first brightness pattern, and it was on the Sencor generator, at least in my case. And it was like, you had a black background with a box in front of it, and it was like, can you see the box or not? And then, fast forward a few years later, and we actually had a proper 8-bit brightness pattern, and you had to see 17 and above, right? And it was like, oh wow, look how much more granular this is. And then we look at something like this, and it's like, it's a whole nother level of that. This is so granular. I think it's super cool. I'm just kind of geeking out a little bit, but thinking back to how not granular it used to be, it was like you could be 2 or 3 clicks off and the pattern still looked right. And now it's super granular. I really like that.
Yeah, and I think because everything is just, the panels are coming out better out of the factory.
True.
They're more accurate in the factory. So people are really honing in on these small differences.
Yeah.
And wherever there are small differences that can be optimized, that's why we work very closely with the manufacturers to try to take feedback from our customers and feedback from their customers and work directly with their engineers to say, what can we do to get this as good as possible and give end users the ability, if they need to make these very precise adjustments.
Very cool. I like it. That's going to be cool. And my fingers are crossed personally. I'm still rocking a 65 C8 at home. So if this eventually works with the C8, that'll be really fun to play with.
Yep. And I think you might be able, if you have a C8, you might be able to connect as the 2020 and play around with it.
Just try, yeah.
There's just certain things like you wouldn't be able to talk to your Technicolor mode because it has a
Yeah.
different, it's now Filmmaker and it has a different command and stuff. So
Sure.
you could play around with it. But like I said, we're investigating with LG behavior on the previous generation of TVs as well.
Okay, cool.
Because
And
a
then you
lot of
mentioned,
them have had different firmware updates and stuff that has changed behavior since we first shipped Calman with support for those models.
somebody just asked about the C9, and it sounds like that maybe will happen one day, maybe on a 9. Anything on a Z9? That question just came in. Which one's the
So
Z9?
the Z9 is the 8K 88
Oh,
inch
that's the
from
big
last
88.
year.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much the same as a C9 from a calibration perspective. Also, this year those 8K models are called the ZX models.
Right.
So they have the same chip as the 2020 CX and GX models. But they do have like the 77-inch 8K instead of just the 88-inch one that comes with I've actually assembled one of those at a trade show, the
How was
88-inch.
that?
Well, the panel is so big that it takes like 3 people to set it on the stand.
Right, yeah. Oh, it's a monster.
The more fun part was putting it back in the box.
Yeah, that
That's
was probably
always
worse, way worse. It's like you crack a piece of foam in half, you can't find the sleeve it goes into. Yeah, that's always good.
I'm not responsible if this thing breaks.
Yeah, right, exactly. All right, cool. I don't see any more questions about this particular thing, Tyler. If you want to move on to our next topic, I think it's safe. And if you guys do have any more questions about the shadow lift with the LG, feel free to type them in and we'll hit them at the end.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. One other thing is the i1 Display Pro has something called, or the newer versions from I think 20, it was like sometime in 2015 and newer, they have a sync mode called AIO mode, and that is now supported in Calman 2020 R2. Now in the beta, there was a bug where when you connected to an i1 Display Pro that did not have this functionality because it was older, it would let you select it, but then it would switch back to a different mode, but the UI didn't update. So people thought that we like came up with our own AIO mode or something, when really it was a bug in the
It was just a
software
bug.
where
Yeah.
the UI did not update, indicating that it went out of that mode back to the default sync mode. So that's kind of something for people that use an i1 Display Pro. A lot of the home users,
Sure.
that's kind of like their go-to meter.
It's a very
So
popular
that
little
should
meter,
provide.
very popular.
Also, we're adding intelligent averaging to the Klein K10.
Oh, good.
So that's going to be in there as well. Essentially, it allows us to take a whole bunch of readings and use something called interquartile averaging.
That seems to be most helpful on the bottom end, on the darker end. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what it does is it takes a series of measurements and it gets rid of the high and the low. Instead of just averaging them all, it kind of throws away the outliers.
Oh, so the ones that are
near
obviously
black,
screwed up. Yeah.
Yeah, or just whatever ones are out. It takes the closest readings to each other versus the outliers and averages those.
Yeah.
So it's not just a straight standard deviation average.
And is that an R2 feature or is that available now?
That's an R2 feature.
That's an R2 feature. Okay, cool, good. So whenever John just asked, so whenever that hits the streets, then
like I said,
or if you're on beta, maybe. Yeah. If somebody's on beta, is it in the beta?
No, it's something that we just added like in the last few weeks.
Okay, good, cool, good. There's a couple questions, Tyler, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself here. I knew there was 4 or 5 topics we wanted to cover today. Have we covered them all? Have we covered everything that you wanted to cover?
I think we've covered Yeah, I think we've covered them all.
Okay, okay, good. So let me go back to a couple questions now. And gosh, oh my gosh, dude, it's five minutes till we didn't run way over. This is cool. It's so easy for us to do that, so I'm glad we're on time here. Okay, first question was actually from Sylvan. Um, this may be something that is available where he lives. I'm not familiar with this. He says, what about the Prominence V2?
Yeah, so this is the AZO HDR reference monitor. So
Oh, okay,
the
okay.
first generation one was the CG 3145,
Mm-hmm.
and it only had HDMI and DisplayPort inputs, and a lot of Hollywood is like they're SDI or nothing.
Right,
They
right, yeah.
use SDI for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so the second V2, or it's actually the official number is the CG 3146 instead of 45, and it has SDI inputs, and it also has a built-in calibration sensor and stuff.
Oh, nice,
Um,
cool.
so we're working very closely with them to bring HDR calibration to those. So, but it's not going to be ready for R2.
Okay, okay. And there was another question up here from our friend DB. He says, where did it go? Oh, okay. He's having some issues with reports and saving sessions. Have you come across? I know there was one weird thing with the ISF workflow and saving that session or generating that report, or there was something weird about it. It sounds like maybe DB is bumping into some of that stuff too. What's the update on that?
So we have actually, let me talk about that for a second.
Yeah,
So
and feel free, show it. I think that'd be cool if you want
uh,
to.
well, we have essentially we have this thing called the customer database, and this is on the professional version of Calman, like Studio, Video Pro, and Ultimate. But there's a Calman database that stores all the customer information, so you can go
Sure.
back to it. And then each saved session is saved as a file that has all the measurement data and what workflow it was in. So if you reopen the session, it will populate all the charts and stuff. And we have some people's database got to like over a gigabyte of text in this
Of
database.
text?
And it wasn't even the actual files, it was just like
Oh
data.
man, that's
So
crazy.
we have streamlined a lot of that, including a new search feature. But also one feedback we have gotten for years, and we finally figured out a way to change the architecture, is being able to save like you would in any other document that you're working on. Is so we have this concept of save as new calibration session. And
Hmm.
once you have that calibration session saved, you can just say save, and then incrementally as you're going through the workflow, hit save and it will update that. So if you do have, for some reason, a crash at the end, you don't lose all your data, especially
Right,
like
right.
your pre-calibration. If you have your
Yeah,
pre-calibration data and now you've calibrated, how,
it's gone.
are you supposed to start
You're
over?
just reset
So,
it just because you don't have that one chart. No way. Yeah.
yep. Also, the report templates, they are now tied. You can just browse to any report, but a report is pretty tied to which workflow it's made
Hmm.
to work with, because the report has to pull data from certain sections of the workflow. So they're very tied together. Now, we've done a lot of work in making a lot of the workflows work with a generic report, so kind of
Hmm.
standardizing a lot of it. But so typically before you would just see a list of reports, but now it's dependent on which workflow you're in. And then, but if you want to just browse to any report, you can go to browse and it will open the folder of all your reports.
Right.
Um, or you can do the same thing from this interface. But so we have streamlined a lot of the saving things and done bug fixes since Calman 2020 R1,
Good.
based on people's feedback around
Sure.
where some people were having sessions that weren't completely saved, or
Yeah.
there was just behavior that they weren't expecting. So there
Yeah.
has been some pretty big upgrades on that. So I would encourage people to, after they try that, send feedback
Yeah.
And be as specific as possible. And sometimes we'll ask you, can you send us your saved session and
Hmm.
stuff like that to see if it loads or problems with that. So
Yeah.
there has been a lot of changes around that functionality. So we suggest people once they get their hands on the new version, like I said, imminent, probably in the next week or two,
Yeah.
um, uh, see if you're still having the same problem, because I think we've fixed a lot of those problems, including like some memory related issues where doing a whole bunch of sessions in a row would cause memory to build up.
Sure, sure. I've kind of made it a habit lately. I used to like I would start a session, right? And then I would do the SDR workflow. And then in that same session, I would do the HDR workflow. And then by the time you did the report at the end, the SDR stuff was kind of gone. So what I started doing, and maybe this will help somebody out there, I started doing a brand new session for every picture mode that I'm calibrating. So like there might be one session that's, Tyler Pruitt SDR day, another session Tyler Pruitt SDR night, a third session Tyler Pruitt HDR. And then by the end of it, I can give the customer a folder basically with all the reports and all the stuff in it. That's what I've been doing. It's been helping me. Maybe that'll help somebody out there.
Yeah, and for example, like on the LG workflow, if we go to SDR calibration, and then we actually go to the end calibration, do the post-cal measurements
Hmm.
and calibration complete, it allows you to say which data set you want. So, okay, I want the grayscale and 3D LUT data from the SDR calibration,
Hmm.
and then save the report now, and before you do your next mode. But a lot
Right.
of
Yeah.
people, they want to be able to not only have the report saved, but have the whole session. So in
Sure.
that case, saving each one as its own thing is probably not a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I do. And a couple other people are chiming in too and saying they do the same thing as well. Adam asks, when can we expect more support for HDR calibration on projectors? Wow, that's a whole subject in its own. I've been
Yeah,
using. Go ahead.
maybe we should have like a panel discussion with a few people
Yeah,
on
that
that.
would be cool. We did something similar with our friend Phil Jones over at Projector Reviews during the last fall projection summit. We had a whole session where I think we went about 2 hours talking about HDR and projectors. And
Yeah,
what I normally do. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say there's challenges and different tactics that different
Right.
people use. Some people will
Totally. It's all over the
have a
place.
video processor that does all the HDR and then calibrate the projector to like a 2.2 gamma or 2.4 gamma in
Right.
high brightness mode in
Right.
2020, and then they will have the video processor kind of do the same thing that the projector would do, which would be to convert PQ to gamma.
Right.
But then there's people that want to do everything in the projector and have a PQ curve on the projector, but
Yeah.
then how much should you deviate from it?
Right.
There's a concept of adding scale multipliers and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of it's definitely like the Wild West. There's no like, here is the globally
No. Right.
universally accepted practice.
Yeah.
So it's
Um,
hard to make declarative statements like this is what you need to do in
yeah.
every case. It also depends on the projector and its functionality as well.
Totally. And Adam, maybe one thing that you might check out, we did sort of cover this. I did a webinar with Greg Lowen over summer, I want to say, and we did some HDR work on a JVC projector, and we intentionally did it on a little bit of an older model just to show people, some tricks and stuff you can do when working on HDR and some of those projectors. So feel free, go to the Murideo YouTube page and search for that session, the JVC projector calibration session I did with Greg. There might be some good info in there that'll help you. Guys, with that being said, I don't see any more questions. So if you guys do have any more questions, we'll give it another minute or two to type those in. Tyler, I thank you so much for your time today, and it's always fun talking to you and learning about the new stuff. I'm excited. I'm ready to see it myself. The LG shadow lift thing I think is super cool. I personally work on a ton of LG, so I see that as being super helpful. But I'm curious too to play with some of that monitor. I've been tinkering more with computer monitors and my laptop monitor and stuff. So I'm super excited to see that too. So thank you so much for your time, and it's always fun. I don't see any more questions. So guys, that's it. We will go ahead and wrap up for the day. I did record the session. Feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. I'll get it up on YouTube probably here in the next day or so. So Tyler, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. And if you guys have any other ideas for webinars, feel free, send me an email. We're always looking for feedback and looking for cool things to do for you guys. My email address is super easy, jason@murideo.com. And I think that's it, Tyler.
Thanks.
All right, we'll see you guys next
Until
time.
next
Thanks a
time.
bunch. Yeah, see ya.